My name is Steve, and what I'm about to share with you is something I've carried in silence for years. Even now, sitting in the warmth of my own home, far from the jagged peaks of the Himalayas, I sometimes wonder if speaking it aloud will make it all the more real. I wonder if by retelling it, I might stir something that prefers to remain hidden. But the story has been gnawing at me. I see it when I close my eyes. I hear it when the night is too still, when the house creaks in the dark, when my breath fogs in the air as though I were back on that mountain again. Maybe by telling it, I can let go of some of that weight. Or maybe I'll simply pass it on to you, like a sickness of the imagination. I'll let you decide. The journey began in late autumn of 2019. I had joined a small research expedition heading deep into the lesser-known Himalayan ranges. I wasn't a scientist, not in the strict sense. I'd worked on expeditions before, assisting with logistics, recording data, documenting locations for later study. I had some climbing experience, enough to keep myself alive in thin air. For me, it was part adventure, part work, part restless search for something I couldn't quite define. The team was led by Dr. Sarah Chun, a geologist with a reputation for precision and stubborn determination. Along with her were three graduate students, each brilliant in their own field, but young enough to still believe the mountains would bend to their will. We also had a local guide, Tenzin, quiet, steady, his eyes always scanning the horizon as though measuring the moods of the earth itself. Our goal was simple on paper: study shifting glacial formations in a remote valley that had, until then, been largely overlooked. With climate change accelerating, untouched glaciers were becoming rare, and Sarah wanted to gather data before the region inevitably drew more attention. The first days of the climb were grueling, though not unusual. We trekked through steep passes where the sky seemed to crush the earth, and the air grew thinner with every step. I remember the silence most of all, not the silence of peace, but of absence. No birds, no streams, no rustling trees. Just the sound of our boots grinding snow and stone, and our lungs dragging in the cold. Even at that stage, I had the sense of being watched. I told myself it was the altitude, or my mind playing tricks in the stark emptiness. But sometimes, when I glanced back, I thought I saw shapes lingering at the edge of visibility. Shadows in the mist, a figure standing on a ridge, vanishing when I blinked. No one else seemed to notice, and I kept my doubts to myself. By the third day, the weather turned. It began with a shift in the wind, a sharp, cutting current that seemed to sweep down from nowhere, carrying with it a smell that didn't belong in frozen air. Something faintly metallic, like blood or rust. Tenzin muttered something under his breath in his own language, words too low for me to catch. The storm followed quickly. Clouds swallowed the peaks, and the sky darkened as though evening had come hours early. Snow fell in heavy, slanting sheets, and visibility shrank to only a few yards. The temperature dropped brutally, and every gust of wind felt like it could strip the flesh from our bones that we needed shelter, and fast. To continue would be suicide. That was when we found it. Through the blur of snow, Tenzin pointed toward what looked like the faint outline of a trail, half buried and easy to miss. We followed him, stumbling against the wind, our gear weighing us down, each of us silently wondering if this was just desperation driving him off the planned route. The path wound down into a narrow gorge, the walls rising steep on either side, and for a moment I thought it was simply a dead end. But then, through the curtain of snow, shapes emerged. At first I thought they were natural rock outcroppings, but as we drew closer, I realized they were structures, buildings, roofs heavy with snow, smoke rising faintly from chimneys dot a village. I remember the shock of it so clearly because I had studied the maps and GPS data myself. This valley, according to every source we had, was barren, empty, no human habitation. Yet here it was, a cluster of stone and timber houses, small windows glowing faintly with firelight. The closer we got to the village, the more the wind seemed to change. It no longer felt like a natural storm. There was a rhythm to it, a whispering quality that made the hairs on my arms stand up. Every gust carried hints of sound, distant laughter, footsteps crunching in snow that didn't belong to us, faint voices murmuring words I couldn't understand. Tenzin moved ahead silently, guiding us with an almost instinctual knowledge of the terrain. His calmness should have been reassuring, but there was something in the set of his shoulders, in the way his eyes darted to the shadows, that made it impossible to ignore the danger lurking beyond what we could see. By the time we reached the first houses, our fingers and faces were numb. Snow had seeped into every layer, chilling us to the bone. The villagers were there to meet us, though meet might be too friendly a word. They emerged slowly, almost from nowhere, as if they had been watching us the entire time. Their faces were pale, eyes wide, and they moved with an unusual stillness, as if afraid that any sudden movement might shatter some delicate, invisible balance. A man stepped forward and gestured toward the largest building, which looked like a community hall or gathering place. He spoke in a language none of us recognized, but Tenzin seemed to understand. "Shelter," he said simply, "inside." We didn't question it. Relief overwhelmed caution. We followed them, stepping over the threshold into warmth that smelled faintly of wood smoke and herbs. The moment we crossed it, I noticed how quiet it was. Not just a comfortable quiet, but a tense, watchful one. Even our team, usually chatty and nervous in storms, had gone silent. Inside, the village felt suspended. Time seemed slower here. The firelight flickered across rough-hewn walls, casting shadows that shifted unnaturally. The villagers moved about efficiently, preparing mats and food without asking questions. Children peeked from corners, watching us with curious, unblinking eyes, but when anyone approached, they vanished into the shadows. Something about the air in that room was thick, not with smoke, but with something else. Expectation, perhaps, or warning. Outside, the storm raged. Snow struck the walls with a relentless force, howling through cracks and eaves. Yet inside, the only sounds were our own movements, the low murmur of the villagers, and a strange, almost imperceptible drumming. At first, I thought it was my heartbeat, pounding in my ears from exhaustion and fear. But it wasn't. It came from beneath us, muffled, rhythmic, alive. I mentioned it to Dr. Chun, expecting her to dismiss it. She frowned, scanning the floor with her instruments. "I don't feel anything," she said cautiously, though I could see the tension in her jaw. My teammates avoided looking at me, as though acknowledging the sound might make it more real. Tenzin didn't hide his unease. His eyes flicked toward the ground, and he muttered in his own tone, words sharp and clipped, filled with meaning I didn't grasp. He had always been composed, but now he was tight, like a bowstring pulled to its limit. We ate what little they offered, warm broth and a type of bread that was heavy but nourishing. Even that act felt ceremonial, as if participating in it bound us to the village in ways we could not yet understand. Afterward, sleep became impossible. The storm outside was relentless, but more disturbing was the feeling that something inside the village was stirring. I lay on the mat, staring at the ceiling beams, and the drumming continued, faint yet persistent. I could hear faint whispers, like voices trying to remember something long forgotten. And somewhere, just at the edge of perception, shadows moved where they had no right to. I closed my eyes, willing myself to ignore it, and for a brief moment, I thought I could pretend it was all just a dream. But I could not. By the time dawn approached, though whether it was truly dawn or some trick of the snowbound light, I couldn't tell. I realized we were no longer just trapped in a storm. We were trapped in something else. Something that had always existed in that valley, and that did not intend to let us leave easily. I had not yet seen the full extent of Khampa Village. I had only glimpsed the surface, and already I knew that whatever lay beneath, or beyond, would change my understanding of the world forever. By the time the storm began to thin, the outlines of the village had grown clearer. What I had first thought were simple stone structures now revealed themselves as buildings with strange, deliberate designs. Roofs sloped at odd angles, heavy with snow, while walls bore markings that seemed more than decorative, scratches, symbols, and carvings whose purpose I could not decipher. The villagers moved silently among the buildings, tending to fires, stacking supplies, or simply standing in doorways and watching. Their gazes were unsettling, steady, patient, as though they had been expecting us for a very long time. No one spoke to us directly. The words that were offered came through Tenzin as translation, terse and functional. It became clear quickly that the village was alive, but not in the way any town I had seen was alive. There was no laughter, no disputes, no ordinary chatter. Instead, it was a quiet vigilance, a tension that seemed to hum just beneath the air itself. As we walked through the snow-packed streets, my eyes kept catching movement in the corners, small figures darting behind walls, a child's silhouette peering from a high window. And yet, whenever I turned toward them, they were gone. That, perhaps more than anything else, unsettled me. One house drew our attention more than the others. Its door hung slightly ajar, and a faint light flickered inside. Tenzin gestured toward it with a warning, but our curiosity overpowered caution. The floorboards creaked under our boots as we stepped inside, and I realized immediately that this building had been constructed differently from the rest. The wood was older, worn smooth by countless hands. The hearth burned with a fire that smelled of pine and something else, something acrid and metallic that made my stomach churn. A woman emerged from the shadows. Her face was lined, her eyes sharp, but her expression was unreadable. She nodded at Tenzin, then back at us, and I felt, inexplicably, that she could see right through me. Not just my body, but my thoughts, my fear, the small betrayals of my mind. It was Pema, though I did not know her name then. Tenzin introduced her as the village elder, though she did not offer a smile or any welcoming gesture beyond a subtle inclination of her head. She motioned for us to sit on mats arranged carefully around the hearth, then vanished into the shadows as silently as she had appeared. Around us, the room seemed to breathe. Candles flickered, shadows leapt across the walls, and a cold draft whispered through cracks in the wood. I wanted to speak, to break the silence, but my voice caught in my throat. Then the children appeared. One by one, small figures emerged from behind furniture, from corners, from the doorway. They watched, unblinking, silent, before retreating again. It was as if they existed on the edge of our reality, capable of appearing and disappearing at will. I began to notice other oddities. The villagers' clothing seemed almost timeless, a blend of fabrics and styles that spanned centuries. Their speech, translated by Tenzin, was careful and deliberate, avoiding any detail about their lives or the village itself. Questions about the outside world, about our journey, were met with evasions or a simple redirection to safer topics, like weather or food. I remember feeling an almost physical weight pressing down on me, not from altitude or exhaustion, but from the certainty that something here was older, deeper, and far more complex than I could comprehend. The air was heavy with it, as though the mountain itself or the village were watching, judging, waiting. And then, in that quiet, I heard it again. The drumming. Faint, rhythmic, muffled, like a heartbeat beneath the ground. My heart raced. I whispered to Dr. Chun, who frowned but did not dismiss it. My teammates looked uneasy, but no one wanted to speak the thought aloud. The sound came from beneath our feet. As night fell, the village did not sleep. Windows glowed faintly, footsteps echoed softly in the distance, and shadows shifted where they had no right to. The storm outside had subsided, but inside, the tension grew. I realized with a chill that Khampa Village was alive in ways I had not anticipated, and that our presence here had already altered the subtle rhythm of this place. And yet, despite my unease, a part of me was drawn deeper. I wanted to understand, to explore, to see what lay beneath the surface of this strange, silent settlement. That curiosity, I would soon discover, was both a gift and a curse. The next morning, the village seemed unchanged, yet everything felt different. The light was colder, filtered through clouds that hung low over the mountains. Snow crunched under our boots, though the tracks we left seemed almost reluctant to remain. It was as if the land itself tried to erase our presence. The villagers moved about as before, silent and deliberate, yet I noticed subtle shifts. Children lingered just out of reach, their eyes following us in a way that was unnerving. Adults exchanged glances that suggested knowledge far beyond the simple survival of a mountain settlement. And always, there was that drumming, faint and irregular beneath the ground, never fully audible yet impossible to ignore. I began keeping careful notes, not just of the physical structures, but of behavior. Conversations with the villagers were short, the words measured, almost ritualistic. Every question I asked about the past was deflected. Every attempt to probe deeper about their lives or the origins of the village was met with silence, averted eyes, or a cryptic smile. It was as though they were guardians of something ancient, something dangerous, and my curiosity might awaken it. By mid-morning, I felt it again, a sense of being watched beyond the obvious. Not by the villagers alone, but by something unseen. I would glance up at a roofline, a shadow clinging to a stone wall, and feel the weight of eyes not human, or at least not entirely so. Tenzin noticed too, though he said nothing, his expression tight, jaw clenched. Then came the whispers. At first, I thought it was the wind threading through cracks in the walls, carrying faint echoes of voices. But they were too deliberate, too patterned. My name whispered softly, carried in the spaces between normal sound, never loud enough to startle, but persistent enough to make my skin prickle. I looked around, heart hammering, but the room was empty. Only the children watched, unblinking, their faces pale and still. Dr. Chun, busy cataloging samples of the village's unusual stonework, paused when I mentioned it. "It's probably the wind," she said, though her voice lacked conviction. Even she could not ignore the subtle sense that something was alive in a way that defied explanation. By afternoon, the unease had grown into something heavier. Every step we took seemed to echo too long. Every door creaked with an unnatural resonance. I began to notice patterns in the villagers' movements, subtle gestures, pauses, and alignments that felt deliberate, almost ceremonial. It was as if they were performing an ancient ritual without our knowing, their actions perfectly synchronized with some invisible rhythm beneath the village itself. And then there were the fleeting shapes in the periphery of my vision, figures that seemed human but moved in ways no human should. Shadows stretched impossibly long, sometimes separating from the object casting them, then merging again when I blinked. The children's eyes followed me even when I tried to focus elsewhere. Every glance at them made my stomach tighten, a sensation that something vital and unseen was being measured, recorded, or judged. I whispered my fears to Tenzin. He did not reply immediately. Finally, he said, "This place, it watches. Not like people watch, not like you or I. It knows." I could not ask him what it was. I didn't want the answer, and perhaps, deep down, I already suspected. By the next morning, I had learned to move carefully, to speak softly, to avoid drawing attention. Every glance, every gesture, felt like it mattered in ways I did not understand. Khampa Village was alive, yes, but not in the ordinary sense. It had a consciousness, subtle, patient, and ancient, and it seemed to be testing us, weighing us, measuring our curiosity and our fear. The second night in Khampa Village brought a darkness unlike any I had ever experienced. The storm had passed, leaving the sky empty and oppressive. Snowfields glimmered under a pale, washed-out moon, but the village itself seemed to hold its own shadow, a thickness that refused to lift even under the faintest light. It began, as it often did, with the sound. At first, I thought it was my imagination, a low thrum beneath the floorboards, a dull rhythm that could easily be mistaken for the echo of our own nervous hearts. But as the night deepened, the pattern became unmistakable, slow, steady, deliberate. A drumbeat buried beneath the earth, muffled but relentless. I sat up on my mat, listening. The others stirred as well, though none spoke. Tenzin's eyes were fixed on the ground, lips moving in silent words. Even Dr. Chun, usually unshakable, had gone quiet, her instruments abandoned at her side. The children appeared again, not at the door this time, but standing just beyond the firelight, their faces pale and emotionless. They did not move when we looked at them. They simply observed, and I had the distinct impression that they were waiting for something to happen. I rose quietly and stepped outside. The air was sharp, each breath a blade cutting into my lungs. The village lay still, but the drumming grew louder, resonating through the snow-covered earth. I followed it, tracing its source to the center of the village square. The snow here seemed oddly soft, as if it had been disturbed recently, yet no footprints led away. Then I noticed faint markings in the frost, symbols etched into the frozen ground. I could not recognize them. They were neither Tibetan nor Nepali, but intricate, almost ritualistic, forming patterns that seemed to pulse in time with the drumming. My skin crawled as I realized that the sound was coming from beneath these very markings. I tried to wake Dr. Chun, but before I could speak, the drumming stopped. A silence fell that was far heavier than any storm. The children vanished. Shadows stretched and twisted at impossible angles. And then, just as I thought it had ended, a single, low voice whispered my name. I spun, but there was no one. Only the snow-covered houses, silent and immovable, and the faint flicker of candlelight from within. The voice repeated, soft but insistent, echoing across the square, "Steve, Steve." My heart pounded. I could feel the village itself pressing in around me, watching, breathing. Something ancient and patient, older than any person alive, was aware of me. It was testing me, calling me, measuring my fear. Tenzin appeared beside me, silent as ever, and simply placed a hand on my shoulder. It was a grounding gesture, but I felt no comfort. "It knows you are awake," he whispered, barely audible. "It listens to those who cannot rest. Those who watch it, it watches in return." I did not sleep that night. I sat by the fire, listening to the faint echoes of the drumming that never truly ceased. Each time I closed my eyes, I saw shapes moving beneath the floorboards, shadows writhing where walls met the ground, whispers curling through the air like smoke. I began to wonder if we had stumbled into a place where the natural and supernatural coexisted in delicate balance. A place where the living and the dead brushed shoulders, and where curiosity could be as dangerous as exposure to the bitter cold. By dawn, I realized the village was no longer just a location on a map. It was a living presence, a consciousness intertwined with snow, stone, and shadow. And the drumming. The drumming was its heartbeat that I had crossed a threshold. And I knew, even then, that there would be no simple return to the world I had left behind. The morning after the night of drumming, I could not shake the weight pressing down on me. Each step through the village felt heavier, as if the snow itself resisted my movement. Tenzin led the way to a part of the village we had not yet explored, a path winding between stone walls and timbered homes. Narrow and overgrown, but meticulously maintained, at the end of the path lay a small clearing. And in that clearing was the cemetery. It was unlike any graveyard I had ever seen. The markers were made from dark stone, some polished smooth, others rough and jagged. They bore symbols I could not decipher, strange geometric patterns intertwined with shapes that resembled human figures, animals, and unidentifiable creatures. Some markers seemed ancient, their inscriptions worn almost beyond recognition, while others looked disturbingly recent, the carvings sharp and precise as if made yesterday. I stepped closer, the cold biting through my gloves, and ran my fingers over the smooth surface of one of the older stones. The name etched there was foreign, but the date, 1724, caught me off guard. Other stones bore dates across centuries, leading all the way into the past winter. My stomach twisted. How could this be? We were the first outsiders to enter the village in months, possibly years. I glanced at Tenzin, whose expression had grown grave. He spoke quietly, his words almost reverent. Khampa has always been a resting place. For those who are lost, those who wander too far, the mountain, it takes care of them. I tried to understand, but the logic failed me. Lost. Wanderers? The number of graves far exceeded the population of the village. Even accounting for generations, the math didn't add up. I felt a chill creep up my spine, a certainty that something unnatural threaded through this place. The wind shifted, and I swore I heard whispers among the gravestones. Faint, indecipherable voices that seemed to echo across centuries, murmuring names I did not recognize, but that sounded intimately familiar. I shivered, wondering if I had heard my own name whispered among them. Pema appeared silently at my side. She did not speak at first, only observed the stones, her fingers tracing a symbol as if she knew its secrets intimately. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm but carried a weight that made my blood run cold. "They come here," she said, "when the mountain calls. Some are lost, some are found, and some never leave." I swallowed hard, feeling a lump in my throat. "Never leave?" I asked. She nodded, but her eyes were distant, filled with memories no one should carry. "The snow keeps secrets. The earth keeps secrets. And the mountain, it remembers." I realized then that the cemetery was not merely a resting place. It was a marker, a warning, a reminder that Khampa Village existed at the edge of reality, where the living and the lost converged. The dates, the symbols, the whispers, they were all pieces of something beyond comprehension, something that had been here long before us and would remain long after. As I stood there, a cold wind swept through the clearing, carrying the faint scent of pine and something else, decay, or perhaps time itself. Shadows flickered across the stones, elongating, twisting, as if reaching for me. The whispers grew louder, yet remained just beyond understanding. I wanted to flee, to return to the warmth of the village, but a part of me could not move. I was drawn to the mystery, compelled to understand what force or presence had shaped this place. The cemetery was not just a resting ground. It was a living memory, a testament to the unknown, and I felt its gaze upon me, measuring me as it had measured countless others. That night, the drumming returned, louder than ever. It seemed to pulse from beneath the cemetery itself, resonating through my bones, through the snow, through the very air around me. Sleep was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw shadows rise from the graves, heard faint voices calling, felt hands brush against me that could not exist. I began to understand. Khampa Village was not merely hidden by geography. It was hidden by its own existence, by a force that refused to be comprehended, a boundary between what we knew and what we feared. And the cemetery, with its impossible graves and whispered secrets, was at the heart of it. By the third night, my curiosity had become something more than fascination. It was a compulsion I could not resist. The village, the cemetery, the drumming, they all drew me toward a truth I feared I might not survive. Tenzin refused to accompany me when I decided to explore the outskirts of the village alone, near the edge of a timbered storage building I had noticed earlier. Its foundation was unusual. The stones seemed to shift subtly underfoot, and the snow around it formed depressions too even to be natural. The air smelled faintly of damp earth, colder and heavier than the night outside. I found a narrow opening at the base of the structure, partially obscured by snow and shadow. It was a cave, though its entrance had clearly been modified, reinforced with timber and stone. I knelt and pressed my hand against the frozen earth, feeling a pulse beneath it, not the drumming from above, but a quieter, insistent vibration, like the heartbeat of the mountain itself. Torch in hand, I entered. The cave swallowed me instantly. The snow-covered world vanished, replaced by walls of cold, dark stone. Every sound I made echoed endlessly, blending with the faint, distant drumming from the village above. The passage widened as I moved deeper, revealing chambers carved into the rock. Some seemed to have been storage areas, containing supplies long untouched but preserved in the icy, unchanging environment. Others held objects I could not immediately identify, worn garments, strange tools, and stones carved with symbols that matched those in the cemetery. I paused at one chamber, my torch flickering against the walls. There were inscriptions, some etched into the stone, others drawn in a pigment I could not recognize. Words and languages I could not identify, dates spanning centuries, even some recent, impossibly recent. And then the unmistakable sense of presence. I was not alone. A whisper brushed my ear, soft and intimate. "Steve, you should not be here." I spun, torch swinging, but there was nothing. Only the walls, the shadows, and the faint pulse beneath my feet. I pressed forward, each step a struggle against an instinctive terror that clawed at my chest. The passages twisted, turning in ways that made no sense according to logic or topography. I found myself emerging into small alcoves, each containing remnants of lives, a tattered cloak, a carved toy, a journal whose pages were blank but smelled faintly of smoke and decay. I could feel the history here, pressing against me, a living weight that spoke without words. At the deepest point, the cave opened into a wide chamber. Here, the drumming was unmistakable, a steady, resonant thrum that made the air vibrate. Shadows moved along the walls, too fluid to be my own, too purposeful to be random. And there, in the center, a depression in the stone floor, a shallow pit, as if it had been carved to hold something or someone. The air around it shimmered slightly, as though the room itself breathed. I could not tell if I was seeing spirits, memories, or some trick of the mind heightened by exhaustion and fear. But I knew one thing. Whatever had created this village, this cemetery, this network of caves, it was ancient, intelligent, and aware of me. And the drumming, it was its heartbeat. I retraced my steps slowly, torch held high, every sound amplified by the echoes. When I finally emerged into the village square, the snow was still, the children gone, the drumming above faint but present. I felt exposed, as though I had been marked by what I had seen below. Tenzin was waiting at the edge of the clearing, expression unreadable. "Did you see it?" he asked quietly. I don't know," I admitted, voice trembling. "I think something lives down there." He nodded, though his eyes betrayed no surprise. "It has always lived. It is patient. It waits." That night, I could not sleep at all. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the shadows in the caves, heard the whispers from the walls, felt the pulse beneath my feet. Khampa Village was more than a village. It was a living entity, a presence that had endured centuries, hidden from the world, and it knew I had seen its heart. And I realized then, with a creeping, bone-deep certainty, that some boundaries are not meant to be crossed. Some truths are not meant to be understood. And once you enter their domain, the mountain, the shadows, and the drumming, they never forget. The storm had cleared by morning, though its remnants lingered in the icy wind brushing over the peaks. The village appeared deceptively calm, as if nothing had happened. Snow sparkled in the pale light, and the distant mountains seemed innocent, timeless, indifferent. Yet I knew better. Packing our gear, preparing to leave, I noticed subtle changes. Footprints we had made days before were partially erased, almost as if the snow itself were reclaiming the valley. Shadows clung a moment longer in the corners of my vision, and the faint drumming beneath the earth, though quieter, was never fully gone. The villagers watched silently as we prepared. Pema appeared briefly, her gaze meeting mine with an intensity that made me shiver. She said nothing, but in that look was a warning, a gentle insistence that some things were not meant to be followed, not to be understood. We began our ascent back to the ridge leading to the mapped paths. Each step felt heavier than the last. Every so often, I swore I glimpsed figures watching us from the snow, shadows that shifted and twisted unnaturally. Children appeared briefly among the ruins of snowdrifts, only to vanish before I could approach. Even Tenzin, usually unshakable, moved with unusual caution. His eyes scanned every ridge, every shadow, and when he spoke, it was with a hushed reverence I had never heard in him before. "The village, it chooses when to be seen," he said. "It chooses who leaves." I tried to process his words rationally, to dismiss them as superstition born of a lifetime in the mountains. But deep down, I knew he was speaking truth. Khampa Village was not bound by maps or coordinates. It was alive, patient, and aware, and its presence stretched far beyond what my mind could comprehend. By the time we reached the first familiar trail, the village had vanished from sight, almost literally. Peaks and ridges that had seemed navigable before now obscured the valley. Snowdrifts blocked paths that had been open the previous day. I checked my GPS repeatedly. The device, which had faithfully recorded our journey until now, showed only an empty, uninhabited valley. No village, no structures, nothing. I looked back once more, half expecting to see smoke rising from chimneys, the faint glow of firelight, or a shadow at the edge of the snow. But there was nothing. Only silence, vast and cold, stretching into the horizon. In the weeks and months that followed, I would try to explain it rationally. A hidden settlement, a natural anomaly, a hallucination caused by altitude and exhaustion. But every time I closed my eyes, I could hear the faint drumming beneath the snow, feel the weight of unseen eyes, and recall the whispers calling my name. I returned home changed. Not physically, my body was intact, my records complete, but mentally. The world I had known, the rational, mapped, predictable world, felt thinner somehow, more fragile. I understood then that there are places where the rules of ordinary life do not apply, where human perception is only a thin veneer over something older, something patient, something that waits. I have never returned to Khampa Village, nor do I know if I ever will. Others have tried to follow the coordinates, the maps, even my own vague directions. None have found it. It is elusive, shifting, alive. And yet, I know it exists because I felt it, walked among it, and heard its heartbeat beneath my feet. Tonight, as you lie in your own bed, safe and warm, perhaps in a world that feels entirely mapped and knowable, think of the snow-covered mountains far away. Somewhere in those peaks, a village waits. It watches, it listens, and perhaps, if you are not careful, it remembers you too. I sometimes wonder if Khampa Village allows people to leave so they can carry its memory back into the world. A subtle, unexplainable reminder that some places are beyond comprehension, beyond maps, beyond time, and that the boundary between the seen and the unseen is far thinner than we like to imagine. I am Steve, and I walked among the living and the unseen. I do not know if I was chosen or allowed to leave. I only know that I can still hear the drumming, just beneath the snow, just beneath the world, calling my name in the night. And sometimes, when the wind whistles through the mountains in a certain way, I swear I hear whispers, Steve, Steve, come back.
Thank you for watching my video. Please like, subscribe, and share my channel with your friends and family. You can also click on the bell icon to be notified when I post new videos.